tell her friends about it, bring her friends. And I love sharing that story because for me, I came to Vala at a time 20 years ago when I was really looking for a community space for other second generation Viets who were passionate about our community, about storytelling, about progressive storylines, and I found it in Vala. And 20 years later, I'm still here. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy and honored to be able to introduce our moderator today for our second panel, Unleashed Young Authors Telling Stories panel. So Anh Do, she's a community engagement editor at the Los Angeles Times, works across the newsroom to spotlight our journalists and journalism, bringing our diverse talent closer to the audiences they serve via virtual and live events. She recruits for the newspaper along with representing the Times and communicating with the public who have questions about its news standards and practices. Before coming to the LA Times, she spent 11 years in the Metro section. Before coming to this role, she spent 11 years in the Metro section covering Asian American issues and general assignments. A second-generation journalist, she has reported from the Seattle Times, the Orange County Register, and the Viet Daily News. Anh is a graduate of USC with degrees in journalism and English. Her writing on culture and trauma has won awards from Columbia University and the Asian American Journalists Association. She received Yale's Poynter Fellowship in Journalism, and in 2016 was part of the Times team that won a Pulitzer Prize for breaking news coverage of the San Bernardino terrorist attacks. So I would love for all of you to join me in welcoming our moderator for today, Anh Do.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much for gracing our auditorium today. I realize it's a very busy weekend, so we're very grateful for your presence and your love of words. Thank you, Julie, for being so kind in the intro. We have a very diverse Vietnamese American panel. As you saw from the first session, just because you're Vietnamese doesn't mean your experience mirrors each other. Everyone interprets culture differently, and you will see that in their writing. We're all younger writers, and we use that term lovingly and loosely, knowing you've published 1 or 2 books, and that's a commonality, yet each of you have imagined very different worlds. We'll try to give you, the audience, a window into each of those worlds, so let's start exploring. I'm going to introduce you to our really lively, in-thought personalities one by one. So Carolyn Huynh, she's born and raised in Santa Ana. She really wanted to leave California. And so she told her mom that she applied to all the UC colleges when she graduated from high school, but she really didn't. Which is smart. That's another trick that you can learn. So she actually went to undergrad at Seattle University, where she majored in my favorite major, journalism. And then she got a master's degree in human-centered design from the University of Washington. Carolyn has a soft spot for stories about really messy women who never learn from their mistakes. That really sounds familiar in my life. And as the youngest daughter of Vietnamese refugees, she makes her home in LA now, and she focuses her writing on her mom's tall tales and superstitions, the diaspora, and memory that's both real and imagined. I really like that description, so always keep it in your bio, and you can kind of play around with it.
You can take it.
I love that.
Yeah. Feel free to take it.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandon, for dressing up.
Wait, this is on?
I got my first deck law earlier. Yes.
You read
Is it? Oh,
it. You read it.
you can't see that.
Brandon is actually a TV writer by day.
Ooh.
He moonlights as a novelist at night. He may look young, but he has years of experience raising 2 daughters who are under the age of 10. And before he wrote his first book, He was actually an animation executive for 10 years. So if you think that he thinks there are dancing characters in his head, it's always a lie. He was born and raised in Portland and also went to the University of Washington. And you know how sometimes we hear stories about writers taking 10 years to deliver that very first product? His journey is like lightning quick, and you'll learn a little bit more about that. I really admired how the opportunities just came so easily for Brandon, unlike so many others who search and search and search for that pivotal agent. Christina Vo, this is actually Christina's second book. She wrote a memoir first. It's called The Veil Between Two Worlds. Her day job is in development for Stanford, but she has worked in international organizations in Switzerland and Vietnam, and she ran a floral design business in San Francisco. She now lives in stunning Santa Fe, where there's actually a wait list to attend her next book event at the city's public library. Yeah, it's her first book signing with her dad, co-author Nghia M, and Christina's dad is a retired physician, and he has done so much detailed independent research of the Vietnamese war, culture, history. He's written more than a dozen books, and among them is The Vietnamese Boat People and Saigon, A History. He continues to spotlight the country of utmost significance to him in conferences across the US. I think it's really special that we finally have a dual memoir, and the concept is absolutely fantastic. I want to start by reading you a quick description of their books. You may have read it, many may have not, but this will whet your appetite to kind of dig in a little further. This is an absolutely gorgeous book cover. When I saw it on Instagram, I knew I would buy it. Yes, you don't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you just have a hunch. It started with their ancestor Duong, who dared to leave her marriage for true love. So a fearsome Vietnamese witch cursed Duong and her descendants so that they would never know love or happiness. And the Duong women would give birth to daughters, never sons. Duong's current descendant, Mai Nguyen, knows this curse well. She's divorced, and after an explosive disagreement a decade ago, she's estranged from her younger sisters, Minh Pham, and Huynh Lam, the youngest, who swears she just runs humble coffee shops and nail salons, not Little Saigon's underground. Though Mai's 3 adult daughters, Priscilla, Thuy, and Thao, are successful in their careers, one of them is John Cho's dermatologist. The same cannot be said for their love lives. Mai is convinced they might drive her to an early grave. Desperate for guidance, she consults Auntie Hua, her trusted psychic in Hawaii, who delivers an unexpected prediction. That prediction says this year, her family will witness a marriage, a funeral, and the birth of a son. Is that going to come true? This prophecy will reunite estranged mothers, daughters, aunts, and cousins, for better or worse. How many people like that description? So popular, right? Yeah. Brandon's book was very unexpected. This is the cover art, and it is very illuminating. Gloria Buenrostro is not my girlfriend. What the heck is that about? Gary Vo is one of the few Vietnamese kids in his high school and has been shy for as long as he can remember. Being ignored and excluded by his classmates comes with the territory. So when the most popular guide in his grade offers Gary the opportunity to break into his inner circle, Gary jumps at the chance. All he needs to do is steal the prized possession of the most beautiful and untouchable girl they know, Gloria Buenrostro. But as Gary gets to know Gloria, he's taken in by her authenticity and genuine interest in who he really is. Soon, they're best friends. Being part of the in crowd has always been Gary's dream, but as he comes closer to achieving infamy, he risks losing the first person who recognizes his true self. Gary must consider if any amount of popularity is worth lacking a real friend. Do you think this is a romance?
Yes.
You do? Who else thinks it's a romance?
Potentially.
Wow, this is a very smart audience. I better not try my usual tricks with you. My Vietnam, your Vietnam. When I saw this title, I thought she nailed it. It says it all in 4 words. There's repetition, but there's also a sense of eloquence. A chronicle of the divergent journeys of a father who fled post-war Vietnam on a small boat to find refuge in the US, and his American-born daughter who ventures to the homeland as an adult, capturing the stark contrast between their perspectives on their shared country as they search for common ground and a path toward mutual healing. There are millions of memoirs across the globe in as many languages as you can think of, but there aren't any memoirs in the Vietnamese American landscape with this sort of duality and intergenerational approach, which is why I think that this will probably be one of those books that people study through the generations. And I hope that you'll have a chance to pick it up. I wanted our authors to kind of give you an idea of what gave them the plot or just the thought of writing along this theme and how long it took from idea to execution. Who wants to go first?
Carolyn.
Oh.
Carolyn.
I'll go next.
How do I do this?
Yeah, look it up. There you
Hello?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Hi, I'm Carolyn. So The Fortunes of Jaded Women took me 5 years to write. Actually, that's not the first book I had written. I had written 2 other young adult books. When I was 21, 24, it just didn't really go anywhere. It was like Hunger Games, dystopian, type of books, and I'm glad it it never went public. But I had taken a long break from writing. I was a journalist, or trying to be for a really long time, and at one point I was like, I need to start eating. Like I need to make real money. So I went into tech for a long time. And I kind of gave up writing. But when I was 26, when you have this itch, I just knew I need to be a writer. I just knew, ever since I was a kid, I was like, I have to write. I need to write. So when I was 26, my friend's mom she would fly to Oahu to see a very famous Vietnamese psychic every year. Her name is Lan Vo. You can Google her. She's quite famous. And she would see this woman once a year to map out her year. And this my friend's mom is quite famous for doing this. So when I was 26, this was a long time ago. I'm not a young writer, but when I was
Carolyn is only 34.
yeah, this is my Jew right here. Yeah. So I went to Oahu for my 26th birthday, and just to see this woman. And I stood in line for 5-6 hours to see her, because you need to have an appointment to see this woman. She's very famous on the island of Oahu. She immigrated there in obviously 75, 76. But yeah, I saw her and I sat down and she told me like you're gonna write 3 books in your lifetime, and I remember thinking I was quite shocked. Right? It's a very famous. So the psychic in the book is based after her, and I remember I went back home after seeing her and I was like, what the hell am I gonna write about? And I was like, I'm gonna write about this woman, and that's the story of the book. And it took me 5 years to write, and I published it when I was 31. Took 2 years of publication, and yeah.
It's a 7-year journey, right?
Yeah, typically in publishing, it takes 2 years inception from when it gets acquired to copy edits, cover everything before it gets released. So yeah, 7-year journey for me.
I just want to say, you and I have done a lot of events together, and I've heard the origin story, but I'm always just captivated in every single time. I'm drawn in.
Yeah.
What a natural storyteller.
Well, I want to see her again before, she's a little bit old, right? So I do want to see her like one last time, like give her a copy of the book in person and be like, it came true.
Go to Hawaii.
I mean, I probably won't go to Hawaii anymore because, I won't encroach on, but yeah, I will send her a copy of the book. Yeah, I do want to be like, I want to give her a copy, like, look, it all came true.
Hurry up.
I know, yeah.
I'll pay the postage.
What about you, Brandon?
Mine was a very unusual journey how my book came to be published. My agent was just having coffee with my editor, and it was almost a very casual. Hey, just straight up, what are you looking to buy right now? And my editor was like, oh, I'm looking for topics on this, and what the topic said was toxic masculinity was something that she wanted to explore. And my agent like lit up and goes, oh, I have an author who I think has an idea. So she picked up the phone and was, hey, I want you to meet with her on the phone. Do you have any ideas for stories that might have to do with toxic masculinity? And I didn't at the time, but the weekend prior, I'm a pack rat. I keep a lot of sentimental stuff, and I was going through an old steamer trunk, and I had a bunch of notes, things that I'd written from elementary school and middle school and high school, and was throwing things out, and I was going through these old notes, and when I wasn't cringing, I kind of came across some gems, some ones from a friend of mine who I had based Gloria off of. She was the girl that was very popular in school, almost more myth, like everyone had their distance, they didn't really know who she was, but she was a friend of mine, and I was reading these notes, and I had the inspiration to do the story, like what if, what if a young boy struck up a friendship with a girl that's like that, and again, this is spoiler alert, although the title does tell you straight up what happens. He falls for her, and she says, no, I don't feel I have the same feelings for you. And what do you do at that point? Do you, as a young man, your heart's broken, do you pout about it, and do you get mad about it, and do you ruin the best friendship you ever had, or do you figure out a way to move forward and keep the best friendship you ever had? So I pitched that over the phone to her, just like I'm doing to you right now. And my editor goes, great. Can I get an outline in 2 weeks? I go, oh, all right, yeah. And she quickly typed out an outline, and then, great. Shared it to my team. Can I get the first 50 in 2 weeks? All right. And then after that, a couple weeks went by. Great, let's go. Deals.
That's like lightning. I never
speed,
had heard of that story.
Yeah, it's very unusual. When other young, aspiring writers come and ask, oh, how did you do it? I was like, don't learn from me. This is the worst way to go about it. I mean, very fortunate, but also very unusual way to sell a book. But yeah, and then from there it was, a date was set, and then I just spent my nights writing. Yeah.
When I interviewed Brandon before today, he said to me, has anyone told a story about rejection, about teenage male loneliness, and about what it's like to be turned down in a romantic way? Vietnamese Americans don't usually tackle this kind of subject. It's more about cultural angst. So I thought that was a very special topic.
Yeah, I was, one, I wanted to do two kinds of representation. One, I'm not seeing a lot of, we're in a great era. I feel like it's going to get better with a lot more Vietnamese authors telling Vietnamese stories with Vietnamese characters. I haven't seen a lot of Vietnamese teenage boy stories. That was one priority I wanted to do. I wanted to tell a story about a Vietnamese teenage boy. And two, I also wanted to tell a story about a Vietnamese teenage boy who has big feelings, isn't he's allowed to feel, he's allowed to like cry and have bigger emotions. Two things that aren't represented that well. So that's really what drove, at least to get that story out. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon. Christina?
First, I wanted to. Oh, is it on?
Yeah, put that switch.
My mom's name actually is Lynn Vo.
Oh.
Yes. And she passed away 30 years ago on Friday.
Oh.
Yeah. So when you said that name, it was really.
Whoa, I got chills. Yeah.
I know. Yes.
Oh, she's here.
This book, I don't even know when it really started. I think it started with my dad. A few years after my mom passed away, he started writing his story. It was his first book, and he wrote it in English. I don't think it was that well written. I had just graduated from high school. I didn't pay that much attention to it, except for the parts that I felt I needed to know just to be able to retell his story succinctly. And it was called The Pink Lotus. And yeah, just kind of, and then he started, his own work, his independent research. He has a deep, deep love for Vietnam and Vietnamese culture and the history of Vietnam. And when I started going back to Vietnam in my 20s to live and work, there was one moment, the second time I moved there, and I was working for UNICEF, and I remember being with a friend in Hoi An and telling that friend, oh, I don't know why I said this, but I just said one day I want to write my dad's story, and then just kind of left it. And then I started writing the third time. Writing for me, it's never been so much, I would say, a literary pursuit, but more a spiritual one, and and similar to my father, I think, to write from this place of gaps in one's heart, and to fill those gaps by understanding, and for me, it was linked to my mom and my dad, because when my mom passed away, for example, she didn't share her story with me, so I didn't really know much about who she was as a person, so that was part of my going back to Vietnam. But actually then, so I wrote a lot about Vietnam in my late 20s, early 30s, and I didn't do anything with it. I just left it there. And then 2 years ago, my dad and I were he asked me to attend this Texas Tech conference, which was brought up earlier this morning. There was a Texas Tech Vietnam Center conference in Orange County, and my dad asked me to join him, and he never asked me to do anything, so I thought, this is important, I should go. And he gave a presentation, and it was so beautiful, because it did still feel like this conference was very much an American perspective on the war. And then when I saw my dad on that panel, the only Vietnamese man, and just speaking so passionately, and I just thought his story, his voice, a voice of his generation, was just underrepresented when we speak about this war in Vietnam, and also the fact that Vietnam is not just a war. But the presentation was called Two Vietnams. And in that moment, I knew that that's why our stories felt incomplete. His to me when I was a young adult, mine to myself, because it did feel like a very flat, and it still feels flat to me, just a story of a woman going back to Vietnam, a Vietnamese American woman. But then in his presentation, I realized they were not complete, because they needed each other. They needed to be pulled together to create one full story of our Vietnam, and my Vietnam, his Vietnam, your Vietnam, but our Vietnam basically. And so after that, I started asking him to elaborate some more on the Pink Lotus. He didn't have the file anymore, so I actually had to retyped everything that I used. I basically retyped 50,000 words of his, and then asked him to clarify some certain points, and then I interwove my story with his. And I didn't tell him what I was doing. So it wasn't, and I think he thought I was just rewriting the Pink Lotus. And it wasn't until I had met with a small publisher who wanted to publish it and it was finished and everything, it was already crafted. I did that crafting. That I told him what I did.
It's remarkable to write a dual memoir, but first to launch it without telling the person that you're doing it with. When I read that part, I was like, wow. Yeah. I kind of gasped. But it's fascinating, and it sort of fits into the theme about just the challenges of communicating between the generations. But if you go back to what Christina said earlier, visualize this. the only university in the entire US to establish an entire archive of Vietnamese studies is in Texas, in a tiny town called Lubbock. But they were having a conference here in OC, and the theme was Two Vietnams. But back Nghia, Christina's dad was there making a presentation, but everyone else who presented was non-Vietnamese. So there's other people talking about your roots, but they are not of those roots. And so the feeling that she got sitting there listening to all of these perspectives was like, wow, we gotta jump in there, right? And that's what you heard the first panelist saying. Who is going to tell your story? Christina's dad had written his memoir called Pink Lotus, but never typed it.
No, he did, it was self-published.
Self-published, but didn't save the typed product. Yeah, so you had to retype it.
Oh.
Yes.
One thing that really struck me in Christina's book was there was a Vietnamese classmate of hers that said about her, I remember when I called you at the beginning of our freshman year in college and asked if you wanted to join the Vietnamese Student Association. You said that you didn't really do the Vietnamese thing, and now you're going to Vietnam. So in very moving phrases near the start of the book, Christina wrote something that I think really resonates with a lot of the 1.5 and second generation. For most of my life, aside from knowing my parents were from Vietnam, I felt little connection to the place. In many ways, I'd rejected the Vietnamese part of myself. The country itself and its people had not at all been part of my consciousness. But then there's a rebirth that eventually happens with travel, on the ground experience, and the emotions that roil inside you. And many of us have had those things, bursting inside us. You all had really unusual titles that were supposed to be originally the title of your book, not the one that's right now. What was yours, Brandon?
The original title was "This Is Not a Love Story." That was one that was pitched, and it got that was it. And I was very happy with it. I was, this is a catchy little title. We're gonna pick this up off the shelves. There's some intrigue to it, and it was that for a long time until my editor called me up and goes, "Hey, someone pitched a different title." And they said, Gloria Buenrostro is not my girlfriend. They just loved the name Gloria Buenrostro. They wanted to have it on the cover. But we were talking about it, and I thought about it, and I go, wait, this actually is a love story in a way that it's just not how you expect. It's a love story it's a friendship. It's a love story. It's not a romance in a way that we think, but it is actually a love story. So, yeah, I'm glad the title changed because This Is Not a Love Story is not really true, at least how I feel, to what the story actually ended up being.
My original title was called The Killjoy Luck Club. Yeah, I really wanted to do a very Southeast Asian Joy Luck Club style, and we sold it as the Killjoy Luck Club. But I think as we got closer to publication, we got cold feet to go against Amy Tan. So, I feel like she has a lot of she could be litigious. I don't know, right? So we made it a double entendre. So the Fortunes of Jaded Women. So the fortunes is the predictions of the psychic, but it could also mean the women, how the wealth that they don't see for themselves, right? Of course, jaded. I want the women to be jaded about life, but how jade means a lot in our culture. So I'm very lucky, very fortunate. I have a Vietnamese American editor behind me, and at the time I had a Korean American woman literary agent. So the three of us combined. It's very rare in publishing to have so many BIPOC people in it helping me, and so the three of us combined were able to come up with that title.
Share with us who your agent was.
At the time, my agent was Stephanie Kim. She no longer works in the industry, but she was the woman who plucked me from obscurity and said, we can do this together.
And it makes a huge difference when you're working with a fellow Vietnamese American because they pick up on all the nuances that the average editor may not. And also, they know what's already been published in the genre. So they'll be able to advise you, like, let's steer away from this and go toward this other area.
Yeah, so my editor is at HUSM, and her name is Lone Lay, and so I was she was also an author. She wrote a love story. So I'm, again, very fortunate to be able to work with another Vietnamese American woman and at the time she wasn't senior. You know, like she couldn't really acquire books on her own, but now like we kind of went up together. She's senior now, so she's acquiring more books. So it's very lucky.
I wanted to know more about Luan Le. She's on Instagram and is very lively. Christina, you did something different, which is you went with a smaller press. Say something about that.
I published my first event for my first memoir in Santa Fe. Santa Fe has been very generous to me in terms of support, but I actually had a book talk, a library book talk, the very first one, it was last year. And before that, the Women's National Book Association, the San Francisco chapter, they do a pitch-a-roma event where you meet different publishers and agents. And this was literally before my first event, so I was kind of scattered anyway, but I went. And I just met this small press, and one of the owners said, "Oh, I know." It was almost like it was in his consciousness some way, and he just said, "I know this book, or somehow I know this, and I want it." And the reason it was very important to me, timing, because in my mind, what I really wanted was actually this book to be published this year and not next year. I wanted it to be part of the conversation of the 50th, and not get lost in, I think that there are going to be so many beautiful conversations and conferences. I know people are already planning them. And so I wanted it to kind of come out before then and still then not get a 2-year, book cycle, but just be a conversation piece.
So you're actually thinking like a businesswoman. Next year, the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the Vietnamese migration to America, there will be so many retrospectives. It will be every month, nonstop, especially in the first 4 months of the year. You can get caught up in that cycle and the remembrances and the beauty of that, but you also want your work to be singularly standing out on its own. And if you're not aware, a smaller press allows you, as the author, to have more personal control over the final product. And also, your material, it comes out quicker. There's less like second guessing, third guessing.
And even with the cover, which is a piece of art, it was done by a Vietnamese artist, not for this book specifically, but during the pandemic, a non-Vietnamese friend of mine shared her art, and I really fell in love with it. It wasn't that painting, but it was another one. So I actually just went through and looked at this woman's art, and that image, before I even knew I was doing the book, it stuck with me. And it was actually I had it on as a screensaver on my phone. And then when I got the title, I remembered this, and then I said I wanted that to be the cover. And they still had to do the thing where it's like, oh, we have to, in my mind, I was like, it's gonna be this cover, so I don't care really what you're saying to me, because I know it has to be that. Yeah. So those kind of, that was important.
Yeah, as you know, writing is painful. It's like worse than dentistry. You have major headaches, you procrastinate, you search your brains, search your skin to find the right space, the right colors, the right rhythm, everything. But for authors, it's not just the writing. Once you do the first draft, the second, the multi, there's the marketing, there's the how are you gonna get it out into the world, there's the cover design, right? Everything, your author's photo, your biography. So think about it in those terms. And for members of our audience who have book intentions or goals, really take a step back and soak up all the ingredients and look at it as sort of like a recipe. These people, I wanted the authors to give you more like a behind the scenes look of how you give birth to this very difficult child. Carolyn actually grew up in Orange County. And what main drama of living did you witness that prompted you to delve into a story like this?
I still feel like I'm very pregnant with it. I've been pregnant for like 3 years with this book. Swollen ankles. Yeah. What was the original question? Oh.
What drama
Oh.
did you witness in daily living that prompted you to tell this story?
I think I really just wanted to write a contemporary Vietnamese American story about the GMs and the Mas and the Mas of my life, where I just don't think they had gotten their due in a very long time. And I feel like Vietnamese women or women who are, immigrant refugees, they typically tend to be seen as like the wailing woman in most stories, and a lot of stories are quite violent towards them. And I really just wanted to give them a light in which they can be like their very funny selves. And I really wanted to write a story that highlights and sort of like uplifts them in that way, as like they're just normal, kind of sassy, fun, unintentionally funny women. And so, yeah, I did base it a lot. This is the thing about BIPOC stories, like, people tend to think like, oh, like you base off your own life, right? I don't want to it is fiction, right? I want it to be a very fictional story.
Your life isn't this crazy.
No. Well, no, I mean, not really to that extent, but it is true, I think a lot of immigrant families tend to hold grudges against one another. Like family dramas are very real, and it stems from a very serious place of pain and trauma, right? Of like not having enough, and like that stems from grudges and things get out of hand. And I do want to address that in the book. And so, it is real. Like some stuff is it is trauma. It's a lot of trauma.
It was special the way that you structured the book, because each woman in it is like the main character. They have their own chapters. You sort of modeled it after the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I have a lot of characters in the book. There's like over 14 women there, but I wanted them all to go on their own separate journey, and they don't meet until the very end. And so I just wanted to, again, give that voice to a wide array of women, and not show that we're not like a monolith, right? Like we all have like different personalities. And I also I wanted to see what it would be like if I wrote my own happy ending. And that's why it's a little bit more joyful than what you would typically see for Vietnamese American stories.
I've read that. I read Fortunes of Jaded Women twice, but when I finished it, I read it twice. Wow. So good. Go buy it. But I immediately bought copies for my cousins. It's like, one, the women are hilarious. Vietnamese women are just hilarious. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make that broad stereotype. They are hilarious.
But they're unintentionally funny. Yes.
But I was like, this is my aunt's. I bought copies for my cousins. Being, oh my God, this is your mom.
Wow, thank you.
And we're like, oh my God, I gotta send this to my other cousins.
Wow. I owe you some money. Royalty statements.
Anyways,
one thing that's special about your book, check this out. I really looked at this over and over. At the beginning, it's a family tree, and it lays it all out. But the most unusual thing that struck me is that the names that you chose, Vietnamese names, to us Vietnamese, they're poetic, and there's a sense of the lasting in each word. But to a non-Vietnamese, and when you're writing in English, you have to figure that your audience is the whole world. It's not just inside your community. Some of the names you chose are very difficult names, and not names that you see in modern day society. Lý Minh Dương and Huynh Lâm. You don't see people naming their children that. Our generation, our 1.5 second generation, we don't name our children that. We usually have Western first name and maybe a Vietnamese middle name. So how do you navigate that with an audience, and you want people to buy your book that is not just the Vietnamese?
Yeah, sales weren't so good at the beginning because of the names I had purposely chosen, right? And again, I'm very fortunate. I have a Vietnamese American editor, right? And we both agreed, like, these are the names that we want to choose, and we're not going to make it easy for the reader, right? If I can learn how to say Michael, they can learn how to say Duong, right? And also the names I picked were quite intentional. My mom's last name is Duong, right? She's from the north, and so every name I picked was very intentional. I think the character my three daughters, it's Priscilla, Thuy, and Thao. So there's one American name and two Vietnamese names, right? But it's actually kind of common. Sometimes there's a one-off kid that has like the Chad Brad name, right, versus like the other two names, and but that one was intentional because the names are Priscilla, Thuy, and Thao, and Priscilla, the boyfriend in the book's name is Mark. So Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, like there's every name has like intention behind it. Yeah, like I'm making like commentary about the type of things I see in the real world, and so.
When you read the part about Mark, he's a jerk.
Oh, he's terrible. Yeah, horrible. Again, Mark Zuckerberg, right? Priscilla Chan, and like, what do they produce in this? Again, yeah. So again, every name is very intentional, and I was very lucky to, even some of the names I named after women I know. Quinn Lamb, that's my friend, right? I asked if I could use her name, and she said yes. And she said, "Is it a bad character?" So, but it's an honor to name my GMs after these characters.
Okay, so after you read her book, we'll have a test, and then we'll have prizes for the winner. Brandon,
Oh, I got to wait. Chrissy, do you have a Vietnamese middle name? Yes. Yes, yeah.
what is it?
Snow. So
Gloria?
yes.
Mhm.
And I mentioned that in the book actually.
Oh.
Yes, and it never meant anything to me growing up because I didn't speak Vietnamese. But then when I went to Vietnam, it was always so beautiful to me to work and just to hear how Vietnamese. And now living in Santa Fe, where there is a lot of snow, it also has meaning. And I think somebody mentioned that this morning of not feeling the most Vietnamese now in her life, and that's actually also how I feel. And I think. It's because, it was a decision to move to a smaller place it's not very diverse, but I think, and I grew up in all those small places that didn't have much diversity and not very many Vietnamese people. And that's what's been interesting to me about even doing these events. Like I've met people whose lives have been parallel to mine, like actually a Vietnamese woman who went to UNC Chapel Hill, which is a large college, graduated the same year as me. I met her on Thursday night. I met another woman who grew up in southern Indiana. I grew up in a Vietnamese woman, and I'm just like, where were these people?
Yeah.
I don't know what you said, but it's just like leaving me. And then another woman. I stayed in Ojai for a little bit, and Thursday night I met a Vietnamese woman who lived in Ojai for 7 years. So I've been reflecting on that a lot of this experience linked to the book has been very moving to me because I've encountered like people that I feel are like kind of parallel, and time is kind of unfolding where it's like I can see the past and the present and the future. And a 14-year-old, that was how old I was when my mom died, a 14-year-old who wants to be, a Vietnamese girl who wants to be a writer, and and her dad said to her, oh, she's such a great writer, and I want her to capture, her grandparents' stories. And she was so wise, and she said, I want to do it, I will do it, but I can't do it now because it's just so much. Every time I try, there's so much emotion. This 14-year-old, there's so much emotion, and I can't capture it, but one day I'll do it.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of things that they want to put down on paper, and you see this as overarching goal, and it's such a huge project. It's really overwhelming, but just focus on one thing at a time. Just capture 1 month or 1 week, and then you approach it like piecemeal. And it's really interesting that at different times in your life, you will feel more Vietnamese or less Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And I hear about this all the time when I interview Vietnamese people in the community. They're like, I never knew my culture, but something sparks it at a moment in time, and that may be what you need for your writing journey. I did some reporting after I looked at your books and read them, and I was curious about what some young Vietnamese and older Vietnamese think about these volumes that you produce. And I asked several people to read these books and share their surprises or reactions. And with Brandon's book, there's a 26-year-old male grad student in Anaheim, and he told me, quote, "It's nice to see how a Vietnamese can write about something normal and complicated, like friendship." And I think usually this is a subject for women. I'm not like stereotyping, but it's more common for women. For the male viewpoint, it's refreshing. Gary, the character, is a likable guy because he's always second guessing and third guessing himself. He doesn't know everything, but he's honest about it. That makes his experiences more real.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
That was, I don't know, like, you're talking about like reading these experiences. That's, Gary wasn't me, but, a lot of his characters were based off what I was like, as a teenager, I was always second guessing myself, in everything, school, relationships, friendships, there'd always be like, we're all Vietnamese, Vietnamese, can I be better, am I doing the right thing, am I doing the right thing? So yeah, I'm glad that was captured.
Yeah, I think that for the writers in the audience, your book is your book, or whatever you're writing about. It doesn't need to follow a cultural theme, or maybe it has elements of the culture, but there's a larger universality that you can speak to. For Carolyn's book, I talked to a 37-year-old mother of toddlers in San Diego, and she said, it may be similar to a soap opera, but you do get caught up in their lives. And they have crazy lives and rich lives. You always hear the older people going to see fortune tellers and depending on them for guidance on what they can do. But now you see what happens when they have consultations. I like Priscilla. I like how we have a better idea of what our mothers and our aunties, our cousins, and maybe our nieces think. We all don't stop finding cultural significance in our actions.
Oh, I thought it was gonna be way worse. So I'm glad it was good. I know. I was like, it's a burn book.
Christina's memoir, I got in touch with a retired educator who's in his 70s in Fountain Valley, and he said we should capture these thoughts before it's too late. Young people never bother to listen to the trauma belonging to the older people. It's not that they don't care. I don't think they can balance their daily schedule to make time to hear or do everything that's important. I just see them constantly rushing around. Maybe they can sit and absorb something like this in another format. Many of our biographies and autobiographies in our community deserve to be on TV or maybe in film. This is something that I can imagine for what you wrote. Christina's book is structured alternating. It's first a chapter of her based on the location, the city where she is at a certain place and time, and they'll alternate with a chapter of her father attached to a different location, and they'll switch back and forth like that. What did your father say when he finally touched the book?
So that's something that I think a thing that comes through in the book is that my father, another interesting point is that my father and I actually don't speak very much and never really have. He's a very quiet, he's great if you want to ask him to present about Vietnamese history or present in general. He's very passionate, but interpersonally, he never really talked very much. And even as a child, and when we lived in Tennessee for 6 years, my mom, my sister, and I stayed in one room, and then my dad stayed in another. And I was always very envious of that, because I thought, why do we have to be together, and he gets to do what he wants to do in his room, and just reads and has all these books. So there throughout my whole, and I think this is also another reason why I wanted to do this book, because it was a form, I hope it might help others, but it certainly was healing for me, because when you retype someone's words, you're very intimately, connected to them. And there were parts of my father that I think I absorbed and understood better, and allowed me to heal that relationship with him without talking to him. But and I said this before, not today, but at other events, I think my father thinks of this as a gift for me to give to others, and I view it as a gift for him, because I think it's a way to share his voice, and interweaving them it's a novel format, so I think more people would read it than just his story. So I viewed it as a gift to him. But he just said, "Oh, it's a good book and people will like it." That's literally what he texted me.
Very Viet, very Viet.
I know.
If you asked him to put his reactions or emotions in words, he would be way more eloquent.
He's not really, he doesn't really write, emotionally or his emotion. And it was so interesting because the other day we had an event on Friday night, and there was one man who just loved my father's writing. His queen, who's here, she read an excerpt, and this man in the back just came up to me afterwards. He's like, you kind of are like a psychology writer, or you're okay, you're good, you should be a toothpaste, something like that, toothpaste model. He said, you have a nice smile. But your dad is like Hemingway. Your dad is like so emotional and can capture everything. What is he talking about? But for him, that's what it was. And it is true in some sense. But in terms of my dad and I actually wanted to do an interview. We did do an interview on the Vietnamese podcast. We couldn't use it because he only wanted to talk about history, and he wanted to know exactly what the questions that were being asked. He cannot speak emotionally, and that's the funny thing about Santa Fe is that he actually doesn't know that I put him on the fly.
Yeah.
He's speaking, and most people are there to hear him
Mm-hmm.
or a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so he arrives on Thursday. So somehow between Thursday and Saturday, I have to figure out how to tell him that he's talking in front of these people.
Yeah, maybe we can help you strategize.
Yeah.
I think this audience can really help.
30 minutes before.
Yes.
That reminds me of like when I got my book deal, right? It's a child, my dream was to have an ISBN number. I was so pumped.
Call my dad up. Dad! Oh my God, I got my first book. Right? This has to be the one that gets his approval. When the next one? I don't know, Dad. I don't know. I gotta write this one first, and then I'll write the next one. Okay. You need any money?
I wanted to link that to something that Carolyn mentioned earlier about how with Vietnamese women, how it's this kind of catty, whatever you want to call it, drama, cattiness. I'm not generalizing, but then with men, there's a silence, and both of those I think are expressions of trauma.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny for me because same reaction, right? My book got Good Morning America, and I called my mom and I called my dad, and I was like, oh my God, I got Good Morning America, and they're like, what is that? They didn't give two craps, right? And so they didn't. I told them again each step throughout publishing, I was like, oh, I got a book deal. Well, don't quit your day job, you know what I mean? And then as the 2 years came closer towards publication, I got a feature at Nghia Viet, and my mom was like, oh my God. You got a feature in Nghia Viet, and so then she bought 10 copies of the newspaper or whatever, and she was then she realized okay,
So that's the goal for upcoming Vietnamese American authors.
Yes.
Is to get featured in
Okay.
Vietnamese media.
yeah.
That's the one that your parents and grandparents follow. So consult me on that. We would love to welcome your questions if you have some.
Is this working? Perfect. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for being able to tell your stories on the panel, being able to get to see everyone and such. Let me pull up my question. Throughout these panels, we've seen a combination of stories about Vietnamese culture, history, kind of looking back to the past, and we've also seen stories that are a little bit more universal like yours, the story of, getting your heart broken as a teenage boy, I think a lot of people, Vietnamese and not Vietnamese, can relate to that. How do you balance telling stories, about drawing those connections to the past, and when to break off of those rails and to tell something new. And as in your experience as writers, how have those scales kind of tipped over time?
Yeah. I'll go.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it was really important for me to, one, you've heard, people that have been on the last panel, where TNFM was even talking about this, like, I just wanted that to have Vietnamese characters in books, in stories, and not necessarily talk about identity, not talk about the war. They're just Vietnamese people living anything. Like they're in sci-fi. They're in, put them in superhero movies, put them in sci-fi, put them in any situations, and don't have to talk. There are those books about talk about identity, books that talk about the war. Those are very important. Very a lot of books like that. But for me, it was important to be like, I just wanted to have a Vietnamese character in a book, just a high school kid living a high school life, having a high school problems. But I wanted to make sure that like there were flavorings, like, as I always say, every dish with a tablespoon of Nc Mam is always going to be the best. Like, that's what you need. So I had a tablespoon of that in my book, right? He is a Vietnamese kid. He's having, like, he cooks, he's cooking Vietnamese meals. He's talking about Vietnamese meals. But that isn't what the entire book's about. But we just had that little flavor, and that just gives us, like, because I wanted more Vietnamese characters in those books, just to have it be normal, just to have Vietnamese characters just being them. That's how I am trying to, bring that, trying to have that balance of having Vietnamese, but actually breaking away from some things that were told in the past into a new generation. For me.
Carolyn, do you have any comments?
No, I agree with Brandon. I just wanted a really contemporary story, and as I grow as a writer myself, like I'm moving. I will always have a main character who is female, or and she'll always be Vietnamese American, and so for me, like, that is sort of like my way of, like, she's just living her life, right? These women are just living their lives. They just happen to live in Orange County, and it just happens to be like the biggest diaspora of Vietnamese people outside of Vietnam itself, right? But that's just normal. That's like my lived reality. And again, as I grow as a writer, like, my third book is just dystopian. It's a spec-lit book, right? My second book that's coming out next year is, like, again, it's about a Vietnamese family, but it's, loosely based off House of Ho. And I love House of Ho. I don't know if you guys watch that reality TV show.
You gotta pitch that. Pitch. What is it? It's Ho meets.
It's Lee's Sandwiches meets House of Ho. Okay.
That's such a good pitch.
Okay. Yes. Okay. That's the pitch.
It's
Yes.
absolutely brilliant plot. The title is gonna win you over right away.
Oh yeah, it's just called The Breadwinner. But again, it's about a woman, in Houston, and it's a part historical fiction, part contemporary. But again, I always emphasize the contemporary part. They're just living their lives, and they're just living here, and they're just trying to figure out, again, love and family and what that looks like and while trying to overcome, like, their parents' trauma.
So The Breadwinner is about a legacy of a dying person who calls estranged children home.
Yeah, it's like it's Succession meets Lee's Sandwiches meets House of Ho. that is the pitch that we sold the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't need long titles. Just have simplicity and have a sense of, like, seduction. More questions, please?
That was a great question. Thank you.
Maybe you can say that.
Yeah, sure. I can stand up. I can speak kind of loudly. You've all kind of shared this, like, very resonant feeling of, like, communication barriers with your parents. And I was wondering whether your work has helped, like, bridge that gap, and if they couldn't fully translate truly, like, fully, and because how can they, right? How do you cope with the possibility that you may never have that, like, imagined peaceful cohesion intergenerationally?
That's a great question.
Wow.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Okay, I'll go.
Christina?
That sort of variants of that question, I think, keep coming up. And I actually don't agree with what the retired educator said about younger people not being interested in it. I strongly disagree with that.
Yeah.
Because in my experience of just talking about this event, there is a deep desire, even more than my generation, to understand our parents and to answer that question that you're specifically asking. And for myself, I have, to me, it all starts with, like, understanding, right? And that's why my father's story was so important to me, because when I could understand his story and what he went through, I could then develop compassion for why he was the way he was in certain ways, what he was doing. Because, you know, coming over in 1970, that being in survival mode is very different. It's different for the body. It's this whole experience. We didn't have to go through what they had to go through, right? And they didn't have also, we're in a different world where there's much more of a language of healing and desire to heal. And that's just a common, I think a rather common framework that, you know, a lot of people are working towards. So they also didn't have the vocabulary. And they were struggling with different things. So again, for me, it starts with this understanding. And it took me like going back to my dad's house many times and sitting in that silence that I lived with from when I was a teenager, you know?
Yeah.
And before it would just be 1-2 days, that's the most I could handle because of my own response to that, right? And then I could stay, the pandemic kind of forced me, then I could stay longer and I could sit with it longer. And instead of looking at the ways that he wasn't loving to me, I looked at the ways that he did show love. The food that's always there, you know, that's like abundant everywhere, like this forced eating that feels so overwhelming. And I actually saw my Vietnamese friend do this to her mom, where we went there yesterday and her mom had prepared food for her and she's like, and I did the same thing. No, you don't need to feed us. And like that is a like rejection of somebody's love, you know. And if you just think of how, and I just saw myself in my friend and how many times I've said to my dad, it's too much, I don't want to eat. And now I just really, so there's a sort of mutual understanding that we hope that they get to, understanding of us in terms of even as creative people that our path, my dad was a retired physician, he wanted me to be a doctor, I didn't want to do that. This mutual understanding that we kind of need from both sides, right? But I've reconciled that my father's never going to be a talkative man. I mean, he's 77 now. I won't have that relationship with him, and I'm okay with that because of all the other ways that he has shown so it's, to me, that reconciliation kind of begins within, and then it spreads. And then once you go through that's how I look at trauma. If you go through it, it's the most beautiful thing. And I think like through this book, I was able to like just literally go through everything. And on the other side, and this is also linked to where I hope our community is or goes, on the other side of that trauma is hope, love, and reconciliation. And when you stop looking at life through that lens of trauma and through love, like the whole game changes. And it's, to me, the most beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Thank you for reflecting on that. And Sean?
Oh no.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to echo what Christina said, where, you know, I was very intentional from going, I wanted the book to go from generational trauma to generational healing, right? So there's a lot of hope in my Gen Z characters, even though they kind of just like smoke weed and hang out, right? But like they also have the most fun. There's levity in them, right? Like they're the ones unburdened by like the trauma that's trying to be forced down on them. Like they just want to live their lives. And yeah, I just wanted to echo that. And, you know, my mom, she was studying English in Saigon in 1975. And she never finished it, obviously, because, you know, we all know what happens, right? And she came over here, and, like, when I told her I wanted to be a writer, she said, oh, my God, you're going to starve. But then she wanted to support me because she also wanted to be a writer, too. So for me, I'm very fortunate to have a mom who supports me in that way. And so it's very full circle for us, for her to be able to read my book when she never finished her English degree.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. So I just have a couple things. One thing is I want to mention something to Carolyn. Then I have a question for all of you. So when I was a kid, my mom came into the house and she says, oh my gosh, we're in Hawaii and we're the only Vietnamese family in Hawaii. So anyone who's Vietnamese basically came to our house or whatever. And my mom was like, oh, there's a lady and she can tell fortunes and she just arrived and I'm gonna get her clients and she's so fantastic and you know, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, mom. And then fast forward, like thousands of people like see this lady and like you're seeing this lady and talking about this. And then my mom calls me like every month. She says, Sean, I have your fortune. Do you want to know? And I'm like, no, mom, I don't want to know my fortune. Like, just don't predict my future, please. And like she keeps like terrorizing me every month. Like I spoke to Duong, she's gonna tell me. But you're writing a book about this. So here's my question, okay? If it's written in English, but a lot of my relatives only speak Vietnamese. So do you think that you'll be able to write these books in Vietnamese or translate them? Because I really want them to read these stories, but they won't read them necessarily if they're in English.
Yeah, we have tried to sell translation rights to Vietnam, but it's a little bit difficult to get it translated. But I've had friends offer to just translate it themselves so our parents could read. But yeah, I'm quite hopeful. But Vietnam was like, no, thank you. We don't want this in our territory. But they did say that they're still thinking about it, and I think it's just like they just vet things a bit harder, and yeah. Actually, in my book, I had a Barbie incident in my book too. You know how in Barbie they got in trouble or they got banned in Vietnam for saying the South China Sea? My book says the South China Sea. So there are just little things like that, you know, that like are a little bit harder to get through the gates. But I'm quite hopeful that it's translated in Vietnamese one day. But wait, do you know Lambo?
I know, I refused.
Well, can you get
I'm
her?
like the one person in the whole world not to go to her.
Well, I want
Yeah.
you to give a book to her.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have to give it to my mom.
Yes, but I cannot go to Hawaii. Don't go to Hawaii. Yeah, like, yeah, but I need her to get the book. Yes.
But I also want to clarify that it's not only the older generation that goes to fortune tellers. I went to a ton of fortune tellers when I was a young person in Vietnam, and yes,
Right?
But in Vietnam.
Yes, in
Yeah,
Vietnam.
yeah.
Yeah, and they said some really interesting things, and some that didn't happen, but.
It's an experience we all should go through
Yeah.
at some time in our lives. Sean, that was Sean, who is the head of the Bowers Museum, in case you want to hunt him down for your future project. Thank you so much to our audience for your thoughtful attention. And Christina just started her book tour. Brandon, again, has gotten lightning acceptance for his second book, which is about a crossbow. And
Yeah, that's Crossbow Destiny. It's my middle grade debut that's coming out this August. Yeah, it's about a Vietnamese girl. I pitch it as Raiders of the Lost Ark meets middle grade Vietnam. As a middle grade girl goes to Vietnam and she finds out that this mythical crossbow of Vietnamese myth is actually real, and it's a race ticket for the bad guys too.
Ooh, sounds good.
so please look for that, and we hope to see you out in the foyer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Authors out first. I've been asked.